साडी बड़ी जमना ते खुली है
The Changi Airport is made up of 3 terminals, so if you have some more time until your next flight, feel free to explore the other 2 terminals, and they are accessible via the SkyTrain. Okay, once you are in the transit area, take the SkyTrain, it's free of charge, and you can go to the other 2 terminals. In Terminal 1 itself, they've got a cactus garden. In Terminal 2, they've got the koi ponds, where some of you were waiting for the tour to start. Down the other side of the hall, there's another koi pond. So beside the sunflower garden, there is actually a theatre where movies run back to back. Terminal 3 itself, they've got a butterfly garden, and they've got a nice garden site. It's a nice way to get out of Changi Airport. If you have been to Singapore many years ago, it's a nice way to get yourself updated. Now, if you're somebody who likes theme parks, you can always, Singaporeans are generally foodies. Okay, so you can get a whole range of food out here, Chinese, Indian or whatever. And well, out here on the left-hand side here, this is actually the East Coast Recreation Park. And the East Coast Recreation Park spans across 15 kilometers. And this is actually where on a good day we enjoy some sun, some sand and the sea. We get to do some rollerblading, cycling, bonding with our family and friends, picnic, barbecue, and if we actually have a permit, we can actually pitch a tent out here. And they've got bicycle kiosks, which I will tell you what I do with them later on. And out in the open, you will see a lot of ships. And that's because the seaport or the sea business is actually the main source of income here for Singapore. And that's also one of the reasons why there is actually a little, we've got our tunnels, underpasses, about 85% of our train system is underground, sewage as well as storage is also underground. Now in Singapore here, we have about 5.5 million people, 3.8 million people are Singaporeans and permanent residents, and the rest of us are here on long-term work or study. And out of this number, 70%, 70% of us are Chinese, 14%, 14% of us are Malays, 9% of us are Indians, and the rest of us are actually a mixture of different races.
9%
and therefore we've got our 4 official languages, and that would be Malay, English, Mandarin, and Tamil. And Tamil is actually our official Indian language housing. Now, because most of the land here in Singapore is state-owned, so more than 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing, and they go on a lease, on a total lease of 99 years. And in Singapore, but usually after a year or 2 of doing so, they all get so sick and tired. Every time they see their children, they ask them, so when are you going to get married? And you quickly do so and get out of my house. So and then with one bouquet of flowers in one hand and a ring in the other, and finding the most romantic spot to kneel down and propose. Instead, he would do it in the most unique Singapore way, and that's by asking her, and be differentiated from the public housing with the fact that they actually have a fence or a wall that runs around it, and beyond these walls and fences, they have their own facilities like their security guards, swimming pools, car parks, tennis courts, and so on. And for all these facilities, a lot of trees, and that's one of the reasons why Singapore is also known as the Garden City. And how we started was because when we gained independence in 1965, we had literally zero. We had no natural resources, we didn't have our own water, we didn't have our own military, and we had to find it out on our own. And at a point of time, there was poor sanitation, people were poorly skilled and poorly educated. So one of the ways to attract investors in was actually to put up trees and clean it up. So we actually had a clean and green campaign. And this particular clean and green campaign made us clean up Singapore in the last few years and try to keep it clean. And we have been very active in putting up a lot of trees and shrubs, replacing them. And in the early days, Singapore was basically a secondary forest. And it was also visioned by our leaders as well as cabinet or ministers out here to change Singapore very dramatically in a short 20 to 30 years time into a cosmopolitan country. And generally, they would actually have seen us clearing out the jungles and replacing them with all these buildings. And soon enough, we were going to be a concrete jungle. And the leader of Singapore at that point of time, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, strongly believed that if you're going to have a lot of buildings around you, it's going to be very hard and cold. So putting up trees actually helps to calm the spirits and balance up the ambiance. So right now Singapore is actually going through a rebranding, and that is actually to change Singapore from a garden city into a city inside a garden. And how we are starting out is actually installing the Gardens by the Bay, which has been the way you actually see the road is actually Gardens by the South. We've got Gardens by the East, which is directly on the left side here. And then behind Gardens by the South, we've got the Gardens at the central area. And out here, this water body used to be sea water, and 8 years ago we installed that bridge out there, and we called it the Marina Barrage. So through natural flushing of water, this water right now 8 years later has turned into fresh water, and this is actually how we save our water cost of desalination. And well, this is where we collect the water, send it directly to the filtration plant, and send it directly to the drinking taps in Singapore. Wherever you are, in the hotels, offices, at the Changi Airport, water is directly drinkable from our taps. Now on the left-hand side here, this short building, green in color, is actually part of the Formula One night race Grand Z, and will actually have the track out there. And this is actually a Singapore Flyer. And Singapore Flyer is actually an observation field that stands at 150 meters in diameter, and because it stands on a 3-story building, by the time the capsule goes all the way up, it will be 165 meters above sea level. And there are 28 capsules, and in each capsule you can sit up to 28 people. Now again, this is actually the Marina Bay Reservoir, and it's actually one of the biggest in terms of surface area. It's up from that point out there all the way to our river on the right hand side. Now this local flight structure is actually part of the Art and Science Museum, which is actually under the management of the Marina Bay Sands Hotel. And this building here on the right hand side, which is 3 buildings, and it's actually crowned by a ship-like structure on top. It's actually the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, that's owned by the Las Vegas Sands, and the designer is actually Oji Zahu. And these 3 buildings are about 55 stories high, a total of 2,561 rooms. And up on top is actually the Sky Park. And the Sky Park, one of the highlights is actually the observation deck, which members of the public can actually go up for an admission fee. Apart from that, there's also a pub and restaurants. I heard around this time now, it's about 1,000, but of course they're talking about the suites and all that. And the pool itself is actually known as the Infinity Pool, and that's because the water seems to be never-ending fluid. There's a vanishing edge out there, and so when you're up in the pool, it looks like half of your body is in the water. Right here, these buildings are actually part of our central business district area. It's also part of the financial district, and this is a mixture of the old financial district as well as the new financial district. So out in the background there, where we've got more of the concrete and granites, that's our old financial district, and that's also where we have the 3 tallest buildings here in Singapore. And because of the size of Singapore, we actually have a height aviation limit, and that's about 280 meters. So out there you can see one building that's called One Raffles Place, white in color. It's got palm trees sprouting out from the top. That's one of the tallest buildings. And on the carbon footprints, during the super trees, 11 of them actually has got a solar panel to boil rainwater. So yeah, that's what I'm about.
So they get back in the book. Sustain.
अगाडि जाऊ अगाडि जाऊ नि मेमोरिज बस्छ यता नि हेर एकचोटि त्यो पछाडिबाटै जाउँ न त्यही खुलिहाल्छ
Atmosphere when it's dry and cool. Atmosphere when it's dry and cool. It's very nice and cool, and it's like a boardwalk as well. So as you go down, you from outside of the dome, you get to financial district, which actually has about 130 banks, both local and foreign. And out there, if you see that building that seems to be standing on its own. It's white in color, circular in shape. When it first started, it was actually steps. So basically, out here, my question usually to the guests is, how long do you think you will need to take to run up those steps? 3 minutes. Or how fast will it be? We're waiting for you to go out there. Now anyway, in 2008, there was a German, his name was Thomas Dohm. He came back in 2009 and broke his own record. And he completed the entire building in less than 7 minutes. 7? So after he's done with this particular building, then we will go on to New York City to scale the Empire State Building. Now this financial district here comes with now a concept whereby we get to work, live and play in the same area. And on the left hand side there, that is actually one of our 6 container ports. We don't have one of the biggest ports in the world, but we do have one of the busiest transshipment ports in the world. A container. So loading and offloading 3 minutes. So out here is where we get a cluster of residential buildings, office buildings, and of course we've got gym, shopping centers and so on. And right now it is actually a lunch hour. So up ahead after the traffic light is actually on the left hand side there. You see a large venue. All the office workers out here. We call it a food court. And in the market space, all the tourists will actually come by here and enjoy some local culture. And on the left of the building, there will be a street called Woodcut Street. And this Woodcut Street will close from 7 p.m. on weekdays and on weekends in right. So you get rice, you get meat and some vegetables. Okay, and that's how fast up for you. And just beside the financial district is actually Chinatown. In the early days, road names were actually attributed to it. Now anyhow, Chinatown was given to the Chinese, and in the early days the Chinese were actually quite happy to be given that place because most of them who came by here were from South China, and they came in as indentured laborers. And they were all meant to work near the harbor as hard laborers. Because the students abundance is the sea south. So with the fish with a nice belly out there, they believe if they're coming by here, they will be well provided for, and they will go home with a lot of money for their family. Early days, the Indians were allocated an area. So on, the Indians decided to move on to a new place because of the lack of employment. So therefore, in those days as well, the Indians started rearing cattle, and one of the cattle that they reared was actually the bull. So they started operating bullock carts, and it was actually a common sight to actually see bullock carts around this area transporting water, because behind these shop houses on the left-hand side, they used to have fresh water wells. So these bullock carts were used to transport water up and down the hill. So literally, this area is what we call Yu Che Shui, which means cow car water. Okay, so when you go to Chinatown, the three characters actually means cow car water.
That's the one I was.
And the architecture out here is, it actually gets channeled in between the bamboo poles. And when it falls off the roof, it gets channeled out down this little gets channeled away from the pathways as well. Now, if you look at the end of the bamboo, it's circled by the side. You put them together, it looks like a bed. Therefore, the Chinese bed means because we have the 4 different races, we have a total of 11 public holidays. And the remaining 3 would be our National Day, New Year's Day, as well as Labor Day, which is the 1st of May. Now, other than that, we've got the unofficial Chinese festivals, and during this time, so in order to prevent all harm to the people, she had immortality killed herself, and she went up to the moon. Now, for the Chinese, one part of the Chinese culture, not all of us believe in that, they believe that the sun and the moon are actually husband and wife. Where they would use to dock the boats out in this area called boat quay, they will load the goods directly into what we call the shop houses for selling. And from that, if they had excess, they would actually bring it by here to Clarke Quay to store. So this is actually where we used to have the warehouses by the riverside. But today, just at the next traffic light, on the right hand side is actually Boat Quay. It's riverside, you don't like party, you just want to sit down and drink and chill. Robinson Quays. The last governor of Street Settlement. And we actually had a mixture of modern and historical buildings on 2 sides of the river. And in those days, Sir Stamford Raffles, who was actually a British working for the East India Company, he used the Singapore River to actually cleanse Singapore. So whereby on one side, in front of us is actually the northern side, and behind us is the southern side. So the southern side was actually allocated for commercial reasons and residential areas. So therefore, they actually had the steps for the workers to offload the goods. And whereby on this side here in front of us is the northern side, so it's actually allocated. Right hand side there, we've got the new Parliament House. Behind it, we've got the old historical buildings as well. So this particular building out here is actually the number of windows. And I used to say in those days when ventilation fully depended on windows only, and these lighters were used to transport goods from the ship and out in the open sea all the way out to the midst of Marina Bay Reservoir. You get to have a very nice picture of the Marina Bay and the Merlion Park and the whole skyline of Singapore. Anyone heard of this fraternity group, Three Masons? Yeah, that's where they're hideout. That's where they all come around and do some gatherings. Anyway, on the left-hand side here, this is where we have the Peranakan Museum. And this Peranakan Museum came around from actually a free school in those days for the boys only. And Peranakan is actually a very special group of people around the Southeast Asia region, and in fact, European suits, whereby the ladies, the older ones will be known as mimics, and the younger ones will be known whereby their top is a little bit more translucent, well and very strong. So otherwise, if a girl at home does that, then mother will come down on her forehead with a spatula as she do it again. So this is the historical aspect of Singapore to come by here. And this building has been around in 1886 and it started as the library section of the Raffles Biodiversity Museum. And in fact, because of the influx of Chinese immigrants, they soon found themselves out of jobs at the harbour, and therefore they went more into cattle rearing, whereby they picked their goats for meat, cows for milk, and of course the bulls as a mode of transport. Somehow or other, they will always find their animals in a nice green pasture behind that blue and white building in front of them. And they realized that it was a very nice green field, whereby it was actually a European. Therefore, the roads behind this building is actually known as a race course road. Now at the mark is where you will find an array of shops which is very rich in Indian culture. And if you're somebody who's interested, a very nice mixture of South Indian food and North Indian food. So right in front of us, after the traffic light, South Indian food, we've got the banana leaf apollo. If you want to have a feel of now one level up is where you get to buy some Indian clothing as well. You'll spot many goldsmith shops around here, and in fact they've got documented at least about 50 goldsmith shops just down this very short 500 meters of Little India. Now one of the reasons is because to the South Indian culture, and one thing they will never do is to wear gold below their waist. So even if it's toe ring, they will never wear pure gold. Now the difference is for the Chinese we prefer white gold, for the Indians they prefer yellow gold, and because yellow gold is more brilliant in color and it's actually very good for investment purposes. Yeah, the value of it increases. So on the left hand side there, we've got the Sri Veera Kaliamman temple, and most of the temples here, Hindu temples here, are South Indian style. We only have one, and that would be the Lakshmi temple, and it's red and white in color. So out around here is where you have a lot of bargain shops, and this street now will come very much alive, very crowded as well, especially on a Sunday. And that's because Sunday is actually the off day. It's very popular among them. And in India in 1951. He was born in 1951 and he came to Singapore in 1956. And at the age of 6 years old, he had very good business acumen and he started selling handkerchiefs beside his father's little roadside stall. And from then on, it actually gave his father inspiration to switch over to I think I need to try. It just makes you one part. And from the time we gained self-government, we have had one brave man who went out to the terrorists, in fact, to bring the hostages back. And he did, actually with that, he actually saved about 5 lives. And along the way, he touched the people's hearts in many different ways as well by funding them with education from his own pockets. So he's very well respected here. So the Singapore flag itself is red and white, and most of the time the colors will be the same in different countries. The red represents brotherhood, and it's very important to us because we are a country that's made up of different races. So that family said one of the reasons is because when we first started, the founding Prime Minister Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his cabinet of ministers strongly believed that corruption, well, they wanted Singapore to be as corruption-free as possible. And the crescent actually represents Singapore as a new nation, and the 5 stars represent the 5 pillars: equality and progress. So equality is part of our pledge, and it's regardless of race or religion. So out here on the right hand side, if you actually take a look at this shop house here, it's actually very different from the rest of it, very intricately carved, and it's got some tiles on it, and this actually represents that it belongs to the Chitti Malaccas, which is actually the Indian and the Malays Peranakan. And one of the reasons why they used these tiles was because in those days, these tiles were only being imported from Europe, and it actually yellow, blue, and at the back there is green. If you come back 2 years later, these buildings will be gone. And that's because they're standing on private land and they are actually public housing. So it's not 99 years yet, but the government needs to take it back. So it is what we call the en bloc. And there will be a form, and because we are like apartments stacked on top of each other, so we'll need to actually hang them, and in order to do that in the early days, they hand wrap. And these clothing, wet and heavy, we will have to stick about 1/3 of our body out and cemented in the back of the kitchen wall. So you see all the multicolored flags flying off in different shapes and sizes. So this is also one of the reasons why Singapore, we started sharing food that we cook, we started inviting each other into our homes for festivals.